Alright, so hey guys. Today we're going to be taking a look at Ashened because I believe the Ashen cards are definitely playable. What we're not going to say they're like amazing or Z tier or anything like that, but they definitely have usages. And the best Ashen card, of course, is Vidos, the Eruption Dragon of Extinction here. So we have some pain points that are kind of awkward. So let's read this card together. Vidos, the Eruption Dragon of Extinction. Noticing how this doesn't have the word Ashened on it anywhere. So we have Priestess of the Ashen City, Obsidian, the Ashen City. So these two would be considered Ashen cards. What's not considered an Ashen card would be Awakening of Vidos, which is technically the best starter you would have purely for Ashen, but you probably wouldn't play this outside of Ashen because Pyro extra deck monsters just they don't really exist. They're not really good. For example, Promethean Princess is a Fiend, and Blue Whale is a Cybers, I believe. So yeah, not so great there. And in terms of fusion pyros, I looked over them, and yeah, there are no good ones. The best one is probably Pyro Phoenix to set up at FTKs, arguably, and the rest are like vanilla monsters, or we have Embers of the Ashened and Vidos the Dragon of Endlessness, or Endless Darkness, which for the most part aren't super generically useful, except for let's see, no, Embers of the Ashened is not really that useful. Although, now that I look at this, you can target one field spell in your graveyard. There's a soft once per turn kind of field spell. We could kind of abuse it with Embers of Ashen. Like maybe we can abuse something like a Draconic Diagram with this. Not really sure how that's going to help you out that much, but you know, you technically do it, I guess. If you could somehow summon Embers of the Ashen. Anyways. So, alright. Vidos popping the field spell. That's the idea for the combo here. We have Obsidian the Ashen City. You pop this, and then this will special summon a Ashen card. And the Ashen card you can special summon. It kind of depends, I guess. You'd special summon Priestess, you'd special summon King, but realistically, I think the interruption, not that great. So first off, you have a kind of super poly effect. So we have this one, Ashen to Endlessness. This is not really that great. So all of your fusions require you to use specifically Pyro monsters, and your opponent, let's assume they're not playing Pyro, so maybe they're playing Mathmech or something, or like 99% of decks, you know, I would argue are in fact not Pyros. If we're just not going by like meta and going by specifically just like archetypes and just cards in the game in general, yeah, there are not that many Pyro decks out there. So yeah, how can you make your opponent's monsters Pyro? So we have Ashen to Endlessness, but specifically the Graveyard effect. You banish this card and one dark Pyro monster from your graveyard. All monsters your opponent currently controls become Pyro until the end of this turn. And then the other thing is Obsidian the Ashen City, which has the effect of face-up special summon monsters your opponent controls become Pyro during your turn only. So yeah, this is only during your turn. So technically this is still good enough to somewhat like negatively affect something like a Flandres, because they require a to have normal summon a winged beast monster to trigger the banished effect to add to hand. But aside from that, this isn't really going to be that helpful. So let's say I go first, I do my combo, I end on Obsidian Ashen City plus Ashen to Endlessness. I won't be able to use Ashen to Endlessness to fuse with my opponent's monsters, unless I have a second Ashen to Endlessness, so I would need one on field, then one in the graveyard, which is pretty damn awkward. But if you manage to do that exactly, then you'd be able to use the Super Poly effect. And we can break down like the deck in several different ways, but essentially, if we look at the engine as a whole, I think it's just not that great. But if we look at the parts and pieces, they actually have a lot of different little usages. So noticeably, let's read Obsidian real quick. you can target, this is the recycling effect, and then the effect here, if this card is specifically destroyed or banished, you can special summon one Ashen monster from your deck. So we can special summon Priestess, or probably the King, and the King has an effect that allows you to special summon an Ashen monster from your hand. But if your opponent controls a monster with 2,800 or more attack, in this case it would probably be Vidos. We can just summon another Ashen monster, I guess, which I don't think is going to be that great. I mean, it's probably just going to be Priestess, right? And then Awakening of Vidos doesn't really matter. Extinguishing of the Ashened. If you play this, we can send any Dark Pyro monster from the deck to the graveyard, then add one level 5 or higher Pyro monster from your graveyard to your hand. This is optional, so we can just essentially use this as a Dark Pyro Foolish Burial, now that I look at this. But okay. For the rest of the turn, after this card resolved, you cannot special summon from the extra deck except for Pyro monsters, though, which sucks. You can banish this card from your graveyard, yada yada. Okay, so because of how like all of this works, it's kind of awkward, but Vidos specifically has a lot of usages just by itself in general, but everything that searches Vidos seems to give you like a horrible extra deck Pyro lock, so that's painful. But if we just look at Vidos by itself, if this card is sent from your opponent's field to the graveyard, you can destroy all monsters on the field. That effect is pretty nice, just for various reasons. This effect is only usable in the main phase, which is slightly unfortunate. It doesn't like matter a whole lot, I don't think, but one really good thing about the Ashen cards is specifically their ability to out field spells is just kind of cracked, so you wouldn't be able to necessarily out a Secret Village this way, but with Awakening of Vidos, we can place a field spell here. In this case, it'll be Obsidian to our opponent's field zone, right? And then Vidos has the ability to destroy, so already this gives you 6 different outs to a field spell. So in particular, I guess, this would be really good for outing Mystic Mine. Unfortunately, it doesn't destroy then summon to an extent, because if it destroyed then summon, then you'd be able to, more or less with one copy of Vidos, force out and guaranteed trade off like a copy of Mystic Mine or something like that, or perhaps Runic Fountain, so that's kind of good. And Vidos specifically has a really low defense, so if your opponent does not link off the Vidos, then you can run this over by battle pretty easily, because it's only got 1.5k defense, assuming you special summon this in the defense position on your opponent's field. If your opponent were to just link this off with SP, there are several downsides to that. Actually, it depends on what our opponent can make, but there are some really disgusting situations for Vidos, the Eruption Dragon in particular. But noticeably, SP, for example, if our opponent links off into SP and Yubel with the Vidos, the SP arrows are actually really bad. So we have a left arrow and right arrow. So if this is link summoned, it has to be summoned to an EMZ because it's a link monster. That's kind of how they work, right? So this would prevent your opponent from further link summoning if they were to make potentially an SP with the Vidos. And Vidos also, technically, because we're summoning it to our opponent's field, can be used to mess up our opponent's zones. It can also be used to, as kind of removal, like if this card is sent from your opponent's field to the graveyard, you can destroy all monsters on the field. So this effect can be kind of a downside, because it'll destroy your monsters as well, so that kind of sucks. But aside from that, if we just use this against certain decks, it can feel pretty unplayable. So one such example that I think is just completely unplayable is Ignister. So all of your guys essentially can't use Vidos. So we have our Dark Infant at Ignister, our Arrival Cybers at Ignister. I guess we could technically make that with Vidos, but not really, because depending on when you summon Vidos, this isn't going to really be feasible. So With Ignister, you have the field spell, which is really important. So we have Ignister Island. If you control no main monsters in your main monster zone, you can special summon a level 1, level 4, or a lower at Ignister monster from your hand, but you can only summon one attribute per turn, I guess. So if this card is in your graveyard, you can banish one at Ignister monster from your graveyard, set this card. So it does have this effect, but you will have to banish the one at Ignister monster from your graveyard to set this again after Vidos pops it. And also Vidos will mess up your zones, and if you do link up Vidos, then it'll destroy everything on the field. So in this case, it'll be whatever you link summoned. So yeah, I don't think Ignister can super easily play around this. And one of the most disgusting things I believe you could do is, well, let's real quick check how this works. If you control blah 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 and you're, so that's like the activation condition. Okay. So let's assume our opponent is playing Ignister and they make transcode, and then they've already used their normal summon. So we're going to then activate Vidos to pop their field spell, and then we're going to place specifically in the transcode zone right below transcode. So transcode technically gives you a lot of advantage back because it can bring back like a Link 2 monster or a Link 3 monster. And technically from that point onwards, you have like Link 6 or 5 in terms of just the arrows, like worth of Link arrows, I guess, if that makes sense. So if we Vidos, we're removing the field spell, and also we're able to kind of somewhat negate the transcode talker and then prevent the field spell from being activated later. So Vidos could be pretty cracked in that sense. And there are a lot of different field spells that get bent over by Vidos for a variety of reasons. So first off, Vidos is essentially very Bistral-like in how it works. So you cannot called by a Vidos. So it's very hard to outplay a Vidos if you're playing a deck that needs a field spell to resolve for whatever reason. So one deck that might be okay would be like Centurion. All you have to do to play around Vidos is to simply normal summon a Centurion or place a Centurion card just somewhere, and then your stand-up Centurion cannot be destroyed. But if we were to instead like be playing against Flandres, we can easily destroy map. We can destroy just Zombie World, Necro Valley, Therion Discoliseum, the yugioh field spell, just Nightmare Throne, right? We can destroy all of those, and the difference between this and Ghost Ogre, like we could also destroy Raidsoth, I guess, right? The difference between this and Ghost Ogre is like insane against field spells, particularly because you wouldn't be able to necessarily stop the search unless it was like the Tenpai field spell, the Sengen Summoning, because Sengen Summoning searches, the way it searches allows it to be destroyed by Ghost Ogre, but we wouldn't have to worry about Sengen Summoning at all. We wouldn't have to worry about this effect too much, nor this effect. We can just pop it immediately with Vidos. And our opponent, if we were playing Ghost Ogre instead, assuming you don't need the search for Sengen Summoning, you would be able to just not use it and just do the full combo to play around Ghost Ogre. There's no playing around Vidos. And you could technically called by Ghost Ogre as well. No called by on Vidos, so Vidos is pretty cracked here. I suppose though, I mean, if we could somehow find a way to summon Priestess, it might be like alright, because I'm thinking along the lines of maybe we play the field spell if we can. There'll be like some situations we might be able to do so. Summon Priestess, adding a copy of Extinguishing the Ashened, or if we really need copies of Vidos for whatever reason, we could, well, depends on like the meta, right? But if we really are feeling particularly just hatred against, let's say, Mystic Mine, let's see how many outs to Mystic Mine this deck actually has. So we have Priestess of the Ashen City. If this card is either normal or special summon, this adds one Ashen card from your deck to your hand, right? So Awakening is not an Ashen card, but you do have Extinguishing the Ashened. So we can technically add this, or no, not add this, activate this after we do our full play, whatever it is, right? We just do this at the end of the turn. We send Vidos, and then we'll just add Vidos to the hand, and then boom, we have Vidos now to remove whatever field spell. So every single copy of Priestess you would technically have in your deck, I would argue, is going to be, well, this is going to be a way to out any field spell, kind of. Well, it doesn't out Secret Village because we need to activate a spell for this, so yeah. And then there's Hard Opening Vidos. We have Awakening of the Vidos. Then if we can pop Obsidian reasonably, then that's also an out. So this puts us at 15 different, specifically cards that can somewhat out, I guess, a field spell. The only one that's not a one card is Obsidian. So if we're just going for purely one cards, then we have 12. So pretty cracked in that sense. So if we were looking to specifically out like a Mystic Mine, this deck would have been crazy with it. And there are other aspects as well, like how Mystic Mine requires you to control less monsters than your opponent, and this specifically gives your opponent a monster, which is also another aspect that can potentially help with outing, I guess, a Mystic Mine, right? So that's kind of cracked in that sense, I suppose. All right, let's see. Aside from that, of course, Vidos is a monster we can give to our opponent, so that sets up dumb things like Geonator Transverser. We can prevent our opponent from imperming using Gamma, whatever. And Mulcharmies, I don't think we can really prevent Mulcharmies with Vidos, but I mean, well, we could kind of prevent it depending on how things go. But for the most part, that's not an aspect of Vidos that we're going to really be able to particularly use. And I mean, yeah, the effects on Vidos are just good in general. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today. And I mean, there's probably some decent usage for the Ashen cards, and we'll probably be looking for that in a different video, because yeah, there's no way that giving your opponent a monster and being able to quick effect pop a field spell isn't good, in my opinion. But I mean, the rest of this and the locks and all that kind of make this kind of bad. So imagine Snake Eye, but you would actually have to play the Snake Eye cards and no generics. Snake Eye is pretty trash, actually, without the generics. Like, without Apollosa, what can we end on? Like, 2 traps or something? I think it's like Startling Stare of the Snake Eyes. And then there was the Quick Play spell. That's something I don't remember. I think it reduces attack, and then you can like destroy guys if their attack is reduced to 0. And the reduction is based on Diabellstar's attack, I think. Something like that. And then there's like a Ghetto Omni Negate. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.